Well, I think there's like four massive revolutions going on in technology right now. There's the AI revolution, which I kind of think of as programmable knowledge. There's the synthetic biology revolution, which I kind of think of as programmable biology. There's the energy transition, which we think of as programmable energy. And then there's the crypto revolution, which I think of as programmable money. And those four revolutions are all kind of crashing as waves at the same time. Instead of there being the internet revolution and the mobile revolution, all of a sudden we got four happening at the same time, and they're all feeding on each other. AI being maybe the mixer of them all. It's unlike any time I've been in the venture business. It's just moving incredibly fast. It is intoxicating. It is also sobering, which is weird. You're saying, wait, Fred, you said it was intoxicating. Now you're saying it's sobering. But it is actually both of those at the same time.
Welcome to the Internet History Podcast. I'm Brian McCullough. For my entire career in tech and startups, Fred Wilson has been like the god-level VC in the New York City ecosystem. Fred got his start investing before the dot-com bubble, rode the bubble, investing in the earliest internet companies to great success, and then turned Union Square Ventures into the premier venture capital firm on the East Coast. Hear the story of Fred's investments in Geocities, Etsy, Coinbase, MongoDB, among others. When I first started this podcast almost 12 years ago, Fred was one of the top 5 people I had on a list that I wanted to talk to someday. I was finally able to make it happen to relaunch this podcast. Here's Fred Wilson. Enjoy. Fred Wilson, thanks for coming on to talk to us today.
Oh, glad to be here.
So correct me if I'm wrong about this, because this would be one of the most unique backgrounds of anyone I've ever interviewed for projects like this. But did you originally go to school for naval engineering?
I did.
How did you?
Well, that is not exactly right. My first job out of college was in naval engineering. My degree was in mechanical engineering, which is kind of a pretty generic thing. But my first job out of college was in naval engineering.
So you're designing boats?
Yes. Yeah, and I actually worked. I think the reason I got that job was that in college, I worked at a research laboratory where they did a lot of modeling of boats and hulls and keels and things like that. So I had some experience with that sort of stuff through the job I had in a research lab in college.
Any particular reason why that didn't end up being your career?
It turned out engineering wasn't really for me. I mean, I was good at it, but it was maybe not as exciting of a career as the one I ended up in. And I guess I kind of instinctively knew that and I was looking for something better.
So you then get an MBA at Wharton.
That's correct.
And so that you're coming out of there in the late 80s, right?
That's right.
And so, the cliche, or maybe the more common route coming out of Wharton with an MBA in the late 80s is to go to Wall Street, traditional finance, that sort of stuff. But you end up in VC. How did that happen?
Well, I had a technical background, and I was really more interested in the intersection between technology and finance as opposed to just straight up finance. And I had opportunities to go work on Wall Street coming out of school in 1987. And they would have been much more lucrative too. But I don't know. I kind of had an instinct that working at the intersection of technology and finance would be more exciting. And so I took a job in a little venture firm that doesn't exist anymore that was in New York and was doing the kinds of things that I thought were interesting. And so I did that instead.
That was Euclid Partners.
That's right.
Okay, late 80s, venture capital in New York City. What are you investing in?
Well, there was a lot of venture capital in New York City, even as early as the late 70s, because wealthy families like the Rockefellers and the Whitneys had pretty large venture capital programs. And then there were just a number of people who had left the investment banking business to start venture capital firms. I'd say there was probably somewhere between 10 and 20 venture capital firms in New York by the mid 80s. But most of the investing that we did, and all of them did, was in Boston and in the Bay Area. So, we weren't really investing in companies in New York at the time. We were investing in companies in Boston and Silicon Valley for the most part.
And companies doing what?
Back then, it was the beginning of the PC era. So there was PC software. There was what they called client-server computing or local area networking. Companies that made the software and hardware to connect devices. And then, there was some enterprise software that was designed to run on these network devices and servers that were being made by Microsoft and other companies. And so that was really what the business looked like in the late 80s.
So I'm assuming Euclid is where you sort of learn the ropes, get your chops. Feel free to name check some folks that helped you learn the ropes or mentored you at Euclid.
Well, I worked for two partners who hired me, Milton Pappas and a guy named Bliss McCrum, and they taught me a lot. They were a lot older than me. They were in their mid-50s when they hired me, and mid-60s when I left. So they were, very experienced and really knew the ropes of startup investing and raising capital for companies and that sort of thing. So those were definitely the two biggest influences on me. And then a bunch of entrepreneurs that I invested in back at Euclid also turned out to be, very impactful for me. A guy named Isaac Karev, who built a couple of companies that I invested in, is a brilliant software engineer, and some guys, Ron Schreiber and Jordan Levy, who had a company up in Buffalo called Upgrade Corporation that I put money into. They taught me a lot about working with founders. In general, like working with founders teaches you to work with founders. And so I think a lot of what I learned back then came from that more than, say, I don't know, other venture capitalists. Like I said, the two partners I work with taught me a lot, but I really think most of what I've learned over the years in the venture capital business has come from founders.
So you said that you're investing mostly in the Bay Area and Boston, but you're based here in New York the whole time?
Yeah, I've always been here in New York. I've been in New York for 42 years now.
All right, paint a picture for me, the pre-dotcom era here in New York City. What is the tech scene in New York City, say, in 92, 93, 94? There's CD-ROM stuff, there's digital media stuff, but when do you get a sense that there is some energy bubbling up here?
Well, right then, New York was always an industry town. So you had Wall Street, you had the entertainment industry, you had the media industry, legal industry, insurance, I'm leaving healthcare, fashion. I'm probably leaving some out, but hang on a second. I'm just going to close the door here so we don't have noise coming in. What was going on, even as far back as the mid 80s, was that a lot of entrepreneurs would leave those industries and start tech companies to serve those industries. most typically in Wall Street and finance. So there's a lot of that going on as far back as the mid-late 80s. But what started happening in the early 90s with digital media, and that really, as you mentioned, was sort of CD-ROMs to start, and then online services like CompuServe and AOL, Prodigy, was technology that would ultimately reshape the media and entertainment industries. And so that's when you started to feel a real sense that, New York could be a major player in this new stuff that's coming along. And Prodigy was here. AOL was down in DC, and I can't remember where CompuServe was. I think the Midwest somewhere. But anyway, none of these were in Silicon Valley, by the way. And most of the CD-ROM stuff was also on the East Coast. So that was when, the New York New Media Association got going, and that was a bunch of VCs and a bunch of entrepreneurs who sort of identified this new area as very promising. And, there would be monthly salons, to talk about this stuff. And that was when I and a lot of other people thought, oh, okay, this is going to be, New York's going to make some sense as a place to start companies. So that was like 92, 93, 94.
When does the sort of itch to be like, not only maybe I want to start my own firm, but I want to start a fund that is going to target specifically this nascent industry?
Well, by 95, I had been at Euclid for 9 years and started to feel like I had learned pretty much everything I was going to learn from Milton Bliss. And we also were very small. Like the largest fund we ever raised was $25 million, which, was something back then. It's really not very much right now. But I don't know, I just felt like I needed to find a bigger platform. And I had done a bunch of early internet investing in 94, 95 into 96. And that's when I realized, like this CD-ROM and online services thing, those are the precursors to this much bigger thing, which is the World Wide Web. And so I really wanted to start a firm to focus on that. And I got very lucky that a couple of large capital providers that I had been doing deals with expressed an interest in working with me. And both Chase Capital Partners, which was the private equity group at Chase Manhattan Bank, and also the SoftBank Corporation in Japan, had reached out to me to do something with them. And I was able to, along with my partner, Jerry Colonna, craft that into what became Flatiron Partners. And it was a little bit of an unconventional venture firm because we only had 2 capital partners for the entire history of that firm, which is very atypical. But that got us going. And, we started Flatiron in, I think, the summer of 96, and we were off to the races.
So summer of 96, SoftBank has already done like its Yahoo investment at that point. Like they're already making internet investments, right?
Yes. And they just wanted more. Like they just wanted more connectivity. They had an office in Boston. We were sort of an outpost for them in New York. SoftBank is really interesting company. They are very aggressive. Like when they want to do something, they want to do it in a big way. And then we just got swept up in that, which was fantastic for us.
Right. How difficult would it have been to raise an internet fund in New York City at that point if you didn't have those 2 big LPs on board?
I don't think we could have done it. I wasn't really very well known at all back then. Jerry was at a place called CMG that was kind of well known, but he didn't yet have much of a track record because he had just gotten in the venture business. Maybe we could have done it, but I don't know. I didn't think that was a path that was going to be fruitful. Like I saw the opportunity to go work with SoftBank and Chase to be just like a gift that like came down from on high, So I just was like, yeah, let's do this. This is great.
How did you and Jerry hook up? Which, just FYI, I interviewed him 2 weeks ago, so I have his side of this story. But how did you hook up, and then how did you describe for me the partnership and how you work together?
So one of the entrepreneurs that I backed in the Euclid days was Mark Pincus, and Mark's another one of the entrepreneurs that taught me a lot. And he was quite young back then. I mean, Mark is somewhere between 5 and 10 years younger than me. So I was 35. Mark was probably 30 at the time, but he was a hard-charging entrepreneur even back then. And when I told him that I had this opportunity to do something with Chase and SoftBank, he said, well, you should, join forces with Jerry. And I had known Jerry a little bit, but not frankly that well. So I went to see Jerry, and, we hit it off and spent, I don't know, maybe a month or two, couldn't have been longer than that, talking about it. And then we decided to do it. So, that Jerry is another gift from on high that landed in my lap at that time.
What's the original thesis? What are you? I think Jerry said something along the lines of, well, we just wanted to grab whatever was happening. We wanted to grab the moment. But did you have a larger thesis than that in terms of companies that you liked and areas that you wanted to focus on?
We just wanted to invest in the internet. And the reason I'm chuckling is that when I would tell that to people, they'd be like, just the internet? And I'd be like, well, the internet's going to be everything. And they're like, oh, come on. It would, because people at the time didn't see it quite the way that Jerry and I did. But yeah, and then now that's kind of a crazy idea, because you say we're going to invest in the internet. That's this massive, massive industry. Don't you need a little more focus than that? But back then that was enough.
Another thing that Jerry and I talked about this time was, the tradition was, at least for tech stuff, you go to Sand Hill Road, you make the rounds, you pitch yourself. And he was describing that your method was to go to whatever, ratty office the startups were in. So going to them as opposed to having them come to the mountain. So how did you find these companies?
Well, Jerry had been a journalist before he got into the VC business. So he kind of had that way that journalists have of kind of figuring out what's interesting and getting the companies to take your phone call. We were a little bit of an unusual thing in the venture business at that time. Like I said, the idea of a firm just focused on the internet was kind of a strange idea in 96 anyway. And so people who were starting internet companies were drawn to that idea. So it was a combination, I think, of us sort of staking out an interesting place in the venture market with a strategy that was a little novel at the time. And then Jerry having, this journalistic way of, getting to things that were interesting. I guess what he said to you is we just wanted to figure out what was happening and invest in it. And Jerry was very good at figuring out what was happening.
Can we hit a couple of the big investments from this period, starting with Yoyodyne?
Well, that was Seth Godin. And that was just, let's back Seth. He's creative. He's smart. He's doing interesting things on the internet. And that was the entire investment thesis. There really wasn't much more than that. He happened to be in New York. Just north of New York in Hastings or Irvington or wherever he was based at the time, may still be based there. So that was Seth. And, that ended up getting sold to Yahoo. And I learned a lot from Seth. We learned a lot from Seth, but I ended up working more directly with Seth. That was the company that I was responsible for. And Seth taught me a lot.
Because that's a name that maybe people wouldn't remember necessarily. What was Yoyodyne like? What was the product?
It was permission marketing. I mean, which at the time was like this novel idea that you would seek permission to send an email to somebody. Because this was before spam even became a problem. But Seth was already onto the idea that if you wanted to send someone an email, you really needed to get permission to do it. So you could call it direct marketing, email direct marketing, which is, you'd say, well, isn't that spam? And Seth had this different take on it.
You want to do the street.com? Was that one of yours too?
Yeah, the street. So I don't remember how we met Jim Cramer and Marty Peretz, but we did. And I just remember Jim Cramer sitting at his trading desk in his hedge fund and doing what we would call today tweeting. But this was 97. And he had what, maybe was the equivalent of like blogging software. And he would just just write something, going long on Cisco, boom, boom, boom. And boom, it would go out and get published. I don't know. I thought this was like a huge idea. And so we went to Jim and Marty and proposed that we would invest, I don't know, $5 or $10 million into it. And I joined the board, and the company eventually went public. I eventually became the chairman of the board for a while. That was a little bit later on, like late 90s, early 2000s. But Jim was so far ahead of his time. He was like a decade ahead of his time with the idea that people would sit at their desk doing the thing they were doing and would share their ideas in real time with the world. Now, what Jim was doing, just to be clear, was he'd go long Cisco, and then he would tweet that he was going long Cisco, right? So there was obviously there was some financial benefit to that for him anyway. But I don't know. I just still think about that and think about how ahead of his time he was.
Hey everybody, this is Brian cutting in here real quick. If you like the deep dives into tech history that I do on this show, you should know about my day jobs. First of all, I'm the host of the Tech Brew Ride Home podcast, part of the Morning Brew family. Every day, in 15 minutes on that show, I tell you what happened that day in the world of tech. For almost a decade, it's like I'm telling you the tech history that is happening in real time. I'd love you to check it out because that show allows me to do this show. Search Tech Brew Ride Home in your podcast app of choice. But also, I have a rolling fund, the Ride Home Fund. We invest in early stage startups, have made dozens and dozens of investments over the years. So if you're an accredited investor, you can invest alongside me in the companies making the tech history of the future. You can find out more and sign up to invest alongside me at ridehomefund.com. Well, right. There's echoes of the market today. We're recording this at the end of September 2025, where the stock market lives on social media, especially now, and people are tweeting their trades, as part of their trading model. But also, is this
hang on a second.
Yeah. That
was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible. And the crazy thing about Jim was that, people will remember Jim for, obviously he's alive and thriving, so I'm not suggesting anything other than that. But in time, Jim will be probably remembered more for his television personality, which is kind of what he always wanted, even though I think he may have invented tweeting before anybody else did. And I think that in some ways that was the most brilliant thing he ever did, but he will be remembered for being a television personality, which is the thing he really wanted to be.
What I was also going to say was this your first sort of lesson in terms of living out loud, being open about what you're doing? Eventually we'll get into your blogging and things like that, but is this the first time you sort of get that epiphany?
100%. And, at the time Jim was married, and Karen Kramer was her name. It's not her name anymore, I assume. She's taken a different name now because they're not married. But she worked with him at his hedge fund. This is 30 years ago, so I may be getting some of these facts a little bit wrong. And Jim would write about Karen all the time on the street.com, but he never called her by her name. He always called her the trading goddess. So when I decided to start blogging 8 years later and I wanted to refer to my wife, I also took up that idea and started calling her the Gotham gal. Jim inspired me that with the trading goddess. I learned a lot from Jim. Like, he really understood how to use sort of like real-time, fast twitch publishing. He knew how to do it.
Also, an FYI, I interviewed your wife 3 weeks ago. Last one from this era, unless there's another one that you think we should hit, but Geocities?
Oh, Geocities was our biggest win. Geocities changed our lives. My wife and I, we probably had our life changed 3 or 4 times over the years by events like this. But this was the first time it happened, which is that, we had basically been living hand to mouth with 3 kids, living in the suburbs. And then when I went home that day, I said to Joanne, we sold Geocities to Yahoo for $3.5 billion. And she said, "Can we move back to the city?" And I said, "Yes." And that's what got us back here. But anyway, Geocities was a CMGI company, which is where Jerry had worked. And he said, "This is the most exciting company in the CMG portfolio." So we went to David Bonnet, the founder, and said to him, "We want to preempt your next round of financing. We want to put $10 million in." And he was super excited because he loved Jerry and Jerry loved him. They were, big fans of each other. The CMG folks didn't love the idea that we were going to do that deal. And we ended up having to kind of like get very creative. And we ended up coming up with a deal that worked for everybody. And we did that, and it just took off. And it was MySpace before MySpace. It was Facebook before Facebook. I mean, again, David was one of these geniuses who saw where all of this was going, that everybody was going to need like a place on the internet. We can think of that now as like a social media profile or something like that. I mean, people were doing like Beanie Baby and Pez collection pages. That was what it was. But it just became a monster. And Yahoo paid $3.5 billion for it. And that was our biggest win at Flatiron by a lot. We had a couple companies that were better than that.
Okay, I want to hear about those.
Well, it's not a New York company, so it's probably not of interest in some ways.
No. I want to hear it.
We put the seed money into a company that became the eBay of Latin America called Mercado Libre, which is a publicly traded company worth upwards of $100 billion now. That was the best investment we ever made at Flatiron. But that one took way, way longer to materialize. Whereas Geocities, we made the investment in 96, and I think we were out in 99. Like that was that era, it was a crazy era. Stuff would just go from nothing to billions overnight. And, now we've seen that 3 or 4 times. We're in one of those, moments again. But that was the first time in the venture business that there was like full on mania. Internet mania was what it was. Something like Mercado Libre, it didn't even really turn into a public company until like 2005 or 2006. So that's a company that kind of survived the dotcom bubble and crash and turned into something a decade later.
What was the other one that came to mind?
Well, we did ComScore, which turned out to be a big hit for us that went public. That was like the first company. That was like the Nielsen of the internet. Then there may have been some others too in there. It's been a long time. I haven't really stared at the Flatiron portfolio in a decade or longer.
Well, actually, I lied because I've got one more for you because I want to do one so we can do like what you got right and what you got wrong. So what about Cosmo?
Oh, Cosmo. Cosmo was DoorDash before DoorDash or Instacart before Instacart, right? So right idea, I guess, probably a decade or two too early. It was an amazing service, though. Bike Messenger would bring you like a video and to like pop into your VCR and a pint of ice cream. Like, you'd order that at 8:30 and it'd be there by 8:45. People loved it. Cosmo was so huge and it just lost money. It never made money and probably was structurally unprofitable. And that was an example of us kind of drinking the Kool-Aid and thinking that, somehow we could figure out how to make that a business, but we didn't.
Well, so that's what do you think from this era, from the bubble era, what you got right, the lessons you learned that were the right lessons there, and what you got wrong, probably referencing what you just said is maybe you guys drank the Kool-Aid as much as anybody else.
Oh, yeah. We definitely drank the Kool-Aid as much as everybody else. And we got caught up in throwing lots of money at crazy ideas that made no sense. And ultimately, Flatiron came unwound when our capital partners lost confidence in us and the markets. It was a combination of the two, but nevertheless, that was the end of Flatiron in 2001. I'd say what we got right was we were right about the internet being a big deal. We were right about things like David Bonnet and Jim Cramer, who wanted to use the internet to let users publish. We were right about, I'm trying to think of what else did we get really right back then. There are probably a few other things that we got right. But anyway, I'd say that it was an incredible experience, made a bunch of money, lost almost all of it, and learned a ton.
For historical context, do you get a set, like, can you remember the period of time where are you having to go to startups and say, there's no more money coming, or are they coming to you and saying, we're running out of money? Like, give me a sense of you getting the sense that, hey, the jig might be up here.
It was both. I mean, these companies were burning like $2, $3, $4, $5 million a month. And when the markets started to cool, I think very quickly, I mean, I had been in the venture business for almost 15 years by this time. I just instinctively knew, this is going to be a huge problem. So, we ran around all of our companies saying, fire people, cut your costs. But it just like, it was too late for a bunch of companies. They just couldn't adjust fast enough. Some did. Some managed to, ComScore got through, Mercado Libre got through, a bunch of other companies got through, where they were able to, adjust and stay alive. And we helped those companies put together financings during the crash, which were really hard to get done. And we helped probably 20 or 30 companies get to the other side, which was, a real learning experience and really great. But it was brutal. It was brutal. I mean, companies had signed 10-year leases on, office space that had like $20 million of liability, and they had, less than $1 million in cash, and the landlords were like, too bad, I'm not letting you out of the lease, basically forcing companies into bankruptcy right and left. It was really ugly. Like 2000 and 2001 were just a very ugly period of time.
So I was one of those kids that came here to work for dotcom startups and got here too late. The party was over. And I always tell the story that I knew a lot of people that were like, well, I'm going on. This was a fad that has ended. They left the tech industry, right? Never to come back. But there was a certain amount of people that were like, this isn't over. So give me a sense of that with the New York lens, especially, where it's like, I remember a sense, especially in media, like, thank God that's over. Let's go back to the way things were. And then other people being like, well, no one's stopping using the internet.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there were some people, I was definitely in this group, who didn't lose faith. And Brad Burnham's another one who didn't lose faith. And we stuck around working in the New York tech sector, doing some angel investing, licking our wounds, waiting for the moment, which ultimately came when we started Square Ventures. But yeah, a lot of people left the industry, left New York. 9/11 happened a year later. So, it's kind of a pretty bad 1-2 punch.
Right. So let's go to Union Square Ventures. It is the nuclear winter, and it is the recession after 9/11. So, geez, that couldn't have been an easy time to raise another fund. So how did that come about, and how did you actually pull that off?
I had a little bit of money left over from the Flatiron experience, and Brad had some money. And so we incorporated, got an office, and hit the road. And, for a year, we basically personally funded a year-long fundraising effort, lots of planes and rental cars and hotels and stuff. And we just traveled all around the country, basically saying the internet's not over. We read this book by this economics professor, Carlotta Perez, that basically talked about how if you look back at lots of technological disruptions, whether it was railroads or automobiles or whatever, you have this like mania when the technology just arrived, and then you had some sort of financial crash, and then it was after that the golden years emerged. And so we sold that. That was like, when we read that book, we're like, this is our pitch. We sold that during, for a year, and there weren't a lot of buyers, but we eventually got, 10 to 15 investors together, and raised a $125 million fund. And by early 2004, we started working on it in 2003. And by late 2004, we had enough investors that we were in business.
And what's the thesis this time? I mean, we can get into, the large networks of engaged users and stuff like that. But when you're specifically starting out now with USV, at the time, where did you think the opportunities would be?
We just said the application layer of the internet. That was our first thing. So we meant like, instead of, the infrastructure, instead of like telecom and browsers and web servers and, all that, we think it's actually like making stuff for people to do on the internet. And look, that had been going on as far back as, the late 90s with things like Geocities and Yahoo and Amazon and eBay. But we just thought like most of those things, not all of them, but most of those things were kind of one-way type of experiences. And we thought the internet was going to go more two-way, like Geocities, like eBay. And so that was our thesis. And then we saw social media kind of emerging. We saw blogging emerging. And that was like, blogging sort of preceded social media. Blogging was there before Facebook was there. Blogging was there before LinkedIn was there. Blogging was there before YouTube was there. So, then really all of a sudden we started to see these networks, these social networks emerge. But that was a few years after we raised the fund.
It's around this time that you start your own blog.
I started my blog in October of 2003. As Brad and I were raising the first USV fund, we didn't have any money, so we couldn't invest. And so we were running around doing a lot of pitching people, and I wanted something to do, so I started writing.
Well, that's so funny that you say that. You just wanted something to do, because now it's so, a basic toolkit of VCs. You have to get your thought leadership out there, your theses out there, write in public, be in public. But that wasn't you. You didn't do it for any strategic reason like that. It was just you needed something to do with your hands, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I had a lot of ideas in my head, and I wanted to get them out there. Brad and I really believed that by sharing our ideas with founders, the founders would then come knock on our door, and that just turned out to be true. I think that was a little bit of a contrarian idea, because I think a lot of people, when we were raising the fund, would say to us, well, why would you give your best ideas to your competitors? And, we said, well, look, that's the downside of doing it. But the upside of doing it is that founders are going to read this and they're going to come see us. And so we think net, this will be better for us. And it was.
Did you ever really regret it, like early on, especially? But I'm sure there's been times when you're like, why did I ever do this? But did you ever feel like at some point this was a mistake, or was it always a win for you?
It was always a win for me. And USV, it did become a burden. I wrote pretty consistently for 18, not 18, like maybe somewhere 16, 17 years until like 2018, 2019, when I started to dial it back. And it started to become like more work than fun. And it felt like an obligation as opposed to something I wanted to do. And so I eventually figured out how to stop doing it. But that took a very long time for that dynamic to play out.
We're going to play the game of listing names again. And these won't be in chronological order, but let's start with Zynga, which I'm assuming was just, hey, let's go with Pincus again.
Mostly, Mark had made he was one of the angels, along with Peter Thiel and Reid Hoffman and Sean Parker, who put the original angel round into Facebook. And so and then he started this competing social network called Tribe that didn't work, but he was really plugged into social, and he had this idea to build games on top of social networks, which was intriguing to me. And so it was a combination of, I knew Mark, I liked Mark, and I thought he had a really interesting idea about something to build on top of these social platforms. And so that was pretty easy investment for us to do.
Talking about living online out in the open, how did you find out about Twitter and then get involved in Twitter?
Twitter broke at South by Southwest, which I was not there, but a couple of my colleagues were there, and they came back talking about it. I got on it. I immediately, like, a couple things clicked right away. I was like, oh, this is blogging for people who can't or won't spend the time that I do every day writing. But this is a way for everybody else to kind of get their ideas out there in a much more efficient way. That I felt that right away. There was an API that let you build on top of it. So that played into what we were already kind of doing with Zynga in terms of creating a social platform people could build on. And then there was also like the Jim Cramer analogy, which was probably still there in my head. I mean, that to me, the minute I saw Twitter, I was like, oh yeah, this is something that we have to be involved in.
Which actually kind of gets into what you've written about over the years in terms of your evolving thesis about like large networks of engaged users. And the idea that those can be great businesses because they have durable moats, but also it's almost, it seems sort of like dead obvious that like if something creates like a user engagement just organically, like you almost can't manufacture that. You just got to jump on it.
Yeah. Yeah. We had there was a period from like 2005 to like 2010 where Brad and I, and then Albert joined us in the middle of that. We just really were dialed into the idea that this social layer of the internet was getting built, and that was really, really powerful. a lot of people weren't sure that it would monetize. Search was huge already, and so people are like, how could you monetize better than search? I don't know. I wrote a lot about this back then. I really believed that social was going to monetize better than search, and today I think that is true. So yeah, we were all in on that at the time. That was like we were locked in.
Well, Tumblr being another example of that. So how did you get involved with Tumblr?
Our friend Bijan at Spark met David, and he was looking for somebody to do the investment alongside of him. And he called us up, and Brad went over to see David, and David and Marco, two people who had built this thing that was getting really big really quickly. And we were just like super impressed with them. And even to this day, I think Tumblr maybe it didn't port very well to the mobile phone. So that, I think, was the downfall. But in the era when the web was the dominant interface, I think it was the most well-constructed social platform because it supported long form, short form, image, music, video. It had everything in one platform, and it was easy to use, and anybody could do it. It was great.
One more from this era, Etsy, because Etsy is a great sort of New York-born startup story. How'd you get involved with Etsy?
Katerina Fake and her husband at the time, Stuart, who went on to build Slack, they're no longer married, but at the time they were, and they met Rob Kalin, who was the founder of Etsy, and they were looking to do an angel round. They were doing an angel round. And we caught wind of it and asked if we could put some money in, and they said yes. And we made that investment alongside of them. And my partner Albert initially worked on it, but then eventually I took over a year or two later. And Rob's another person who saw something that other people didn't see, and just had a vision and just built at the time, a very cutting edge e-commerce experience. And, he just was at the right place at the right time with the right idea, and they executed beautifully, and they built a great company.
For these like marketplace and community companies, is there some like metric or like behavioral signal that you've found over the years is the most predictive of ones that will succeed?
Yeah, I think user passion, if you can find it, early users who are just extremely passionate about it and just throw themselves entirely at it. The early sellers on Etsy were like that. They were also many of the most significant buyers in the early days, and the early users of Twitter who then were building applications on top of Twitter, or, the people who were flocking to Tumblr because it allowed them to express themselves in ways that other social platforms didn't. And you tap into that, and you can just if you got to use the product to feel it. You have to really kind of engage in the product. But if you engage in the product and you can just capture it, you can say, wow, there's a community that has embraced this, and they're not casually into this, they're into it. And that's the thing that has always been the strongest signal for us.
Was there, looking back, something different about the founders that you worked with in what we call now the Web 2.0 era versus the dotcom era?
Well, yes. I think that the founders who we worked with who were really successful in the Web 2 era were really doing it from a perspective of building a product that millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people would use and love. And they weren't even really very motivated by money per se. Of course, they understood that the company they were creating was going to be worth a lot of money, but they didn't rush to generate revenue. They weren't looking to flip it and get, someone to pay $100 million for it. They were like, no, we're going to build this, this thing, is going to be something that really will have an impact on people's lives. So I'm not saying that they were like necessarily missionary as opposed to capitalist, but there was at least somewhere in the middle they were.
What about the New York tech scene of the aughts versus the 90s in the sense that does it get more mature? It obviously does in terms of there's more startups, more money eventually. But now I would make the argument that it is in the aughts that you can definitely say New York City has a bona fide tech scene. So what did you feel the vibe was like in those years?
Well, you're right. So New York took it on the chin pretty hard after the internet blew up because we didn't have like a 20, 30-year-old tech sector to kind of weather the storm. So, it shrunk a lot. A lot of people left. But the people who stayed, by then you could tell who was really committed. And by say 2005, 2006, new companies were starting to get started again. Venture dollars were starting to flow. Then, of course, we had the financial crisis of 2008, which, definitely was a little bit of a setback. But I'd say by 2010, it was very clear that New York had emerged as probably the second most interesting place in the country for founders to build companies. And that was percolating all through the aughts. But, it took some time to get there.
Why do you think New York had that resilience?
I think it's partially because people love living in New York, that there's a real appeal to being here, and people who wanted to be in a city that was more multicultural, and I don't mean necessarily ethnically so, but also by profession. It just appealed to a different kind of founder, and those founders started kind of very New York-centric companies in lots of ways. And so I just think that New York is kind of a little bit of a 180-degree opposite to Silicon Valley, and I think that was very healthy for it, and still is.
Forgive me if I'm misremembering this, but isn't there like a year in the early teens when you don't do a single new deal?
I think it was maybe 2 years. I think it was like 2010 and 2011. I got a little burnt out. I was blogging all the time, and we had done Twitter and Zynga and Etsy and Tumblr and, a whole bunch of other deals. They all took off, and I was quite involved with many of those companies, and those companies had their own sets of growing pains. Certainly Twitter's have been well documented, but all of them definitely went through some challenges. And I was making new investments in 2008 and 9 and 10, and I don't know, I just didn't feel like I was doing a great job of picking new companies. And so I just took a step back from investing, tried to find something new to sink my teeth in, as opposed to just like doing more of the same. And that was very healthy. Like I think that was a really, really important thing for me to do.
I was going to say, is that advice you would give if you're someone either in VC or a founder or what, or any career where it's like you have burnout and you have to find some way to rediscover passion, even if that means going in a completely different direction, but like taking that time to like to give credence to what you're feeling, which is I'm kind of out of ideas and I'm burned out.
Yeah, I think it's very, very important, and you have to recognize it in yourself, and then be willing to just say, no, I'm not going to do any more investing. I mean, I happen to have partners here, Albert and Brad, and then John joined around that time, and Andy too, who could pick up the load. So I didn't have to necessarily, be as active in terms of new investing, which was a real gift that they gave me. But that was very helpful for me.
Okay, again, this is my recollection from observing you from the outside, but I feel like in my memory, Coinbase was when they're like, okay, Fred's back. Is
Well,
that
that was what was that I think was what was visible, maybe publicly. As I was sort of wandering through the wilderness in 2010 and 2011, I bumped into my friend Ricky Tata, who we had backed in maybe 2007 or 2008 in a company that didn't work called Covester. And Ricky, I just was walking through like what I think of as like the fashion district in the mid 30s, where on Broadway, and I bumped into him and I was like, Ricky, what are you doing? And he says, I'm starting a Bitcoin company. And I was like, well, what's Bitcoin? And he said, oh, you need to read the white paper. And he texted or emailed me the Bitcoin white paper, and I read it. And this is probably spring, summer of 2011. And I just sensed that this was going to be the thing that I was going to really dig into next. And it took me about a year till the summer of 2012 to find a company that excited me enough to do an investment. That's when I met Brian at Y Combinator in the Bay Area. That summer, I was doing office hours, and he came in, and I met him, and then I realized pretty quickly that he had created at the time I was thinking Bitcoin company. Obviously it's more than that now, and so that's when like the world kind of maybe said, oh, Fred's found something new, but I was already kind of there a year before that.
Let me give you one more from this era, and if this isn't yours, let me know. But what about MongoDB?
That was Albert.
Okay.
So Albert, joined us in full time in 2008. He was working as a venture partner as far back as like 2005. And he is a software engineer, and he was building scaled web applications on the side, and was like, the stack that people are building on is no good. We need a new stack. Database, we need a new database. We need a new programming language. We need a new, server infrastructure. And that led him to MongoDB. And obviously he was right about that. And they built basically the database of the scaled web era, and phenomenal success. Love that the company started here in New York and grew here in New York. It's a very Silicon Valley style company. So in many ways, MongoDB was proof that you could create a real hardcore tech company in New York. And of course, it's been done again and again since then.
Mm-hmm. Give me one more dealer's choice of the last 15 years in investment. Doesn't have to be New York City investment that you feel like, man, I really learned something from that one, and that led me into, the present day kind of.
Well, I'm just trying to think of what. I mean, I'm just
blanking.
rifling through my head. I'm rifling through my head of all the amazing companies that we've backed over the years at USV, and but I'm also thinking about like where we are now. And where we are now is a really interesting time with the intersections of AI and things that are happening in biology, and things that are happening in energy, and things that are happening in.
Okay, so let's do that instead. So tell me where you think we are now with this weird intersection of things.
Well, I think there's like 4 massive revolutions going on in technology right now. There's the AI revolution, which I kind of think of as programmable knowledge. There's the synthetic biology revolution, which I kind of think of as programmable biology. There's the energy transition, which we think of as programmable energy. And then there's the crypto revolution, which I think of as programmable money. And those 4 revolutions are all kind of crashing as waves at the same time. Instead of there being the internet revolution and the mobile revolution, all of a sudden we got 4 happening at the same time, and they're all feeding on each other. AI being maybe the mixer of them all. It's unlike any time I've been in the venture business. It's just moving incredibly fast. It is intoxicating. It is also sobering, which is weird. You're saying, wait, Fred, you said it was intoxicating. Now you're saying it's sobering, but it is actually both of those at the same time.
Since we've been talking about the dot-com stuff going down the history lanes today, when people are talking about AI being a bubble and this is going to end badly, do you see patterns? Obviously, you must see some patterns reoccurring, but what is your take when people are afraid that, oh, AI is going to be another horrible bubble like the dot-com era?
Well, so the thing about bubbles is that there's two things I think that people need to remember about bubbles. First of all, bubbles provide the financing for new revolutions.
That book you described from The Economist.
And,
yeah.
they provide it at inflated valuations so people can, I mean, look at what OpenAI and Anthropic and others are doing. They're raising money at astronomical valuations and then throwing all of that money training new models, right? And we can say they're overdoing it. This reminds us of the telecom overbuild of the late 90s, whatever. But the net result of it will be there will be advances that would not have been possible without that investment mania. So that's one thing to remember about bubbles. The second thing to remember about bubbles is after the crash, there's a renewal. And so if you can just ride out the crash and then stick with it, things will be even better afterwards. So whatever, there's a bubble,
Final couple, what do you think of the health of the New York City startup and tech ecosystem right now, 2025?
It's great. It is great. We know so many founders building so many interesting companies here. I think it's better right now than ever. I think Silicon Valley is probably better right now than ever too. So it's not that New York is rising and others are falling. It's just that the dynamic right now in New York is extremely positive. People want to live here. People want to start companies here. People are taking advantage of all of these revolutions I just mentioned here. And it's just a great time to be in the tech sector in New York.
And if someone is listening that is about to form a company, what is your pitch to them? Specifically, what makes New York, they should consider starting their company here?
Well, I think New York is a more exciting and interesting place to live than anywhere else. And, that what they'll tell you in Silicon Valley is, but in Silicon Valley, you can work till, 9 o'clock every night and you have no temptations to do anything other than work. But you can work hard or you can work inspired. And I think sometimes working inspired leads to more interesting things getting built than just working hard. And New York is a place that inspires you more than anywhere else in the world, in my opinion.
As a New Yorker, that's a beautiful answer. So I think we should end there. Thank you, Fred, for remembering all that for us.
Okay, great. Take care.